Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Hello everyone, and thanks for joining us for Friday's live edition of Alaska Weather. Taking a look at the satellite imagery, we'll see that, if I can bounce this forward here, one more. I think I'm going to need someone back in the director's booth to advance these, since I'm getting no forward motion on them at all. But anyway, if we were looking at the satellite imagery, we'd see a frontal system slowly moving northward toward the coast through the Gulf of Alaska, this band right through here, and you can see coming northward, and that puts some minimum gales into the North Gulf Coast during the afternoon hours. It was also a fairly good rain producer as well here across Kodiak Island. Rain all night, all day long, upwards of an inch or more in some areas there on the east side of the island. Less, though, over Bristol Bay, kind of an area, a mixed rain and snow condition here, but nothing at King Salmon, gusty east winds keeping it dry there. But a lot of clouds here across the area, snow in around the Kilbrook Mountains, and it cuts off just south of Bethel there, just some clouds on up to the north, and some very light snow flurries getting out into the Bering Sea. Rain with this band of cloudiness here across the Aleutians, coming back around, low pressure here drifting westward, and that putting some rain down over the eastern Aleutians. Light variable winds there, but northerlies gusting to 40 miles an hour out at Atka. And up here to the north, big mass of clouds there coming across the Arctic coast, starting out back in this area, sliding eastward throughout the day today. And at the leading edge is some Arctic air coming down from the Arctic. Of course, Kivalina seeing northerly winds 40 to 45 miles an hour in gusts this afternoon, and that continuing southward, not quite as strong, only at about 25 to 30 miles an hour at Deering, but still pretty brisk right through the Bering Strait, and that pulling that cold air right down into St. Lawrence Island with the winds as high as 30 or 35, but much lighter down into the northern Bering Sea, at least for the time being. Some variable cloudiness with some areas of clearing over the interior, and pretty solid deck of cirrus here coming up into northern Cook Inlet during the afternoon hours and advancing northward, but the rain having gotten into the Whittier area, but mostly off the coast everywhere else as of 4 p.m., except for Kodiak Island, but some rain now into Iliamna and right along the southeast coast. This now the start of what will probably be a very wet weekend, almost continuous rain starting tonight, lasting well right through Sunday and beyond. On today's weather map, a couple of lows here along this frontal boundary, but again, it's all slowly moving northward and off to the east and kind of stationary through here. Here's the Arctic front up in this area with the colder air, gusty winds behind that. Most of it initially sliding off to the east, but there is a push to the south and southwest, but the whole pattern is going to be shifting eastward and southward throughout the weekend. Today, again, or for tonight, keep it wet up along the North Gulf Coast, occasionally wet Kodiak Island, kind of getting into more of a showery condition, or the rain beginning to taper off, but still it was IFR late this afternoon and become IFR at the state airport. Rain for sure into the southeast coast from well, the Queen Charlotte's all the way up to the north, kind of a narrow band of mixed precipitation, and any snow here on the north side will be quite light, and just some flurries possible up toward the mountainous areas, but not bad, staying dry here, the eastern Alaska Range, central Tanana Valley up to Eagle, Northway Toke, 40-mile country, looking pretty good tonight. Fair, variable high clouds there. And then this area of snow, mostly now over the eastern North Slope, Arctic coastal areas, right down to the Brooks Range. And then another band right through here along and back to the west of the Arctic boundary, drawn in this area. Still those gusty winds continuing in the channeled areas here on the northwest coast, but beginning to diminish a little bit here in those windy areas later tonight, but quite a good gradient here edging its way eastward. That should bring some colder air into the eastern Aleutians eventually here from the north with those northerly winds, and temperatures all across eastern Bering will be coming down here over the next 12 to 24 hours. And for tomorrow, you can see less of a gradient up here in the northwest, so that should still hold on to some brisk wind advisories in the marine zones there, but less wind elsewhere, and still best chance of snow. Looks like it'll be over the western Arctic coast, but there are some impulses coming around this low center that's just north of Barrow there. So it'll be occasionally grazed with some light snow fog. Possible IFR both on the west and east side, drying out, mostly clear and cold here west of the frontal system, a ways west. There'll be an area of snow extending in the immediate vicinity of this front, but it all looks pretty light, though it could be rather continuous here from the Kilbrook Mountains right up into the Koyukuk Valley areas, but again, mostly north of the Brooks Range and to a much lesser extent here over the southeast interior. Occasional light rain and snow at times along the North Gulf Coast with the remnants of that moisture with those fronts, which is pushed into Canada, but southwest flow off the Pacific keeping bands of showers coming in, and when that interacts with the terrain, it'll be just a flat out rain condition here for all of the Panhandle. Back down here watching a storm develop that will turn northeastward as an upper level trough here edges its way eastward and then sharpens up. That should bring a really good shot of rain in to the southern southeast coast late Sunday afternoon at the earliest, or definitely by overnight Sunday night, and that'll probably last into Monday as well. But first, looking at Sunday, you can see it comes up to the northeast during the afternoon hours. Look for an increase in the winds. Looks like gales will stay down over the Queen Charlottes, but definitely potential for an increase in the wind, definitely an increase in the rain, becoming heavy at times over the southern areas, but wet all the way up to Yakutat, Juneau, Haines, back to Cordova. Occasional rain in the forecast each period right through the weekend, and then a little bit better chances of seeing some moisture develop here over south central Alaska in the form of rain or snow with this Arctic front now banked up along the Alaska range. Cold conditions back to the west, but not all that windy. The gradient really slackening up here with snow mostly on the Bering Sea side of the peninsula here, all the way out to the eastern Aleutians, scattered snow showers back up to the north, but high pressure building into the Bering Strait, and just again notably less wind here in the west, but still quite cold temperatures. And looks like this thing will eventually swing through with snow starting late Sunday afternoon at the earliest, or probably overnight Sunday night. And could snow all day here Sunday across south central Alaska till that front in the upper level trough finally swings through, and then that next front weakening as it pushes eastward across the Bering Sea and the central Aleutians. Well, temperatures this afternoon were mostly in the lower to mid 40s here across the Panhandle, 43 at Ketchikan, 41 over at Elfin Cove, and about the same up at Skagway. Near 40 along the North Gulf Coast. Lower 40s though here over the Kenai Peninsula area. 40 at Palmer, up to 46 there at Homer, and the 36 at Valdez. 34 at Copper River Basin at Gulkana, and a 40-degree afternoon reading here at Talkeetna. Lower 40s with the rain and fog there at Kodiak Island. Up to 44, mid 40s there at King Salmon with those east winds. Cloudy skies though. A little bit cooler back to the northwest. Pilot Point up to 43, near 40 here for the remainder of the Aleutians. Up in the interior, Fairbanks pushing up toward 40 degrees in the afternoon with upper 20s back to the west. Much cooler conditions, much colder up toward Anatuvik, 9 degrees at the same time. Arctic Village at 12, below zero along the Arctic coast, but Point Hope did push up to 0, and 23 at Ambler with a 16 at Kotzebue, 8 degrees at Deering, 5 Kivalina with the wind, and 1 at Shishmaref, 0 at Tin City with snow falling there and fog. 23 though at Nome, and 21 here at St. Michael. McGrath up to 35, but there's a 43 at Anvuk. Sparavon 39 degrees, and out in the Bering Sea right around freezing here, just a little below there at St. Paul, St. George up to 32. Upper 30s, rain, fog, light winds on Alaska, and again the near 40-degree readings for the peninsula. Gusty north winds here, the cold air still back to the north, but will be arriving eventually although the big push will be more over the eastern Aleutians and then a little cooler back out toward the Shemya area. For the forecast lows tonight, well below zero up in the north and northwest part of the state, with the 0-degree isotherm pushing down to just north of St. Lawrence Island, cutting in near Golovin, and then on to the northeast toward or just south of Arctic Village. Otherwise, teens and 20s here over the interior, upper 20s, lower 30s over the southern part of the state, with mid 30s over the Alaska Peninsula. Cooling off here, as you can see, over the Pribilofs, lower 20s, and mostly in the 30s to near 40 for the Panhandle. For tomorrow, those highs will be mostly in the mid 40s or somewhere between 40 and 50 here for the southeast coast. Mid 40s again along the North Gulf Coast, as well as the Susitna, Mananuska Valley areas, even the Copper River Basin, some areas pushing in the lower 40s. Staying cold and below zero up there over the North Slope and the Arctic coast, with single numbers for the most part, Selawik Valley, Kobuk, and areas along the Seward Peninsula here on the north side, teens down toward Nome and Golovin. Looks like St. Lawrence Island, both Savunga and Gamble, will have a high of 12 degrees, 20 at Macoriac, and then kind of a range here along the Yukon Delta coast into the teens, but south and east of the front into the lower 40s here over the southwest interior. Some areas of the Bristol Bay trying to push up near 50, like King Salmon. Otherwise, lower 40s and cooler, but still above freezing out over the Aleutians. Flying weather again along the Arctic coast, one trough taking the IFR to the eastern coastal areas, and that will come right up along the north slopes of the Brooks Range, then an improvement behind it, and then another trough bringing some more moisture in and probably some IFR conditions right along the coastline at times tomorrow from, say, Wainwright all the way down to Cape Lisburne and Point Hope. But VFR here with those northeast winds keeping the conditions in the VFR category there for Kotzebue Sound, as well as much of the western coast here. Marginal VFR anywhere over the Bering Sea tomorrow. Some of those northerly winds picking up enough moisture to drop conditions to IFR, especially the eastern Aleutians there. But marginal VFR, Kodiak Island, an improvement from today, and then this area still persisting along the North Gulf Coast, but tending to improve to the south, and one band of moisture pushing eastward. So conditions possibly coming up to VFR there along the central and southern coastal areas of the Panhandle, and then coming back down with the next surge of moisture. For the passes, Anatuvik, IFR, especially on the northern approach, otherwise marginal VFR to VFR toward and beyond the south entrance. Same forecast for Adigan, lowest conditions on the north side, better to the south, and for the western Alaska Range, Lake Clark and Merrill at this point, call it marginal at times throughout the day tomorrow. And same thing for the Rainy Pass, marginal VFR trending lower on the western approaches of actually all three passes throughout the day and tomorrow night. For windy, marginal VFR possible at times tomorrow, especially later in the day. And for Isabel, marginal VFR, but I think Mentasta will be somewhere between marginal to VFR. In fact, Mentasta is down to be VFR, but Tanita VFR becoming marginal. And I guess Mentasta fell off. But anyway, Portage, marginal VFR in the forecast. Chilkoot and White, occasionally marginal, or probably mostly marginal VFR. That front moving in tonight. Could be some IFR there into early tomorrow morning, and then say becoming marginal during the afternoon hours. And from there, moving on to the freezing levels. South of the Pribilofs tonight, actually it's already there, and by tomorrow morning, roughly in this location, still across the north coast of Bristol Bay, and then hugging the coastline here, cutting across the northern southeast coast, probably somewhere between Juneau and Haines. And then some milder air back here coming into the western Aleutians as the next front and the southerly winds in advance of that system drive a little bit milder air in, well, as early as tomorrow morning, but it'll be more noticeable late tomorrow afternoon and into Sunday. And over the southeast coast, 2,000 feet, again, the front coming in, so that'll be tending to knock the freezing levels back down. In some cases, snow levels dropping down to about 1,000 feet over the northern southeast coast. And for icing, it looks possibly like this. Again, icing threats tonight and early tomorrow improving or ending completely there along the southeast coast. Areas of icing possible here, nothing too serious, wrapping back along the coastline down toward Kodiak Island, Kenai Peninsula, And another swath of possible icing conditions here back Kuskokwim Bay, maybe reaching the eastern Aleutians up along that Arctic boundary all the way to the eastern Arctic coast. And the winds aloft showing this one upper low here heading eastward. And again, as this comes eastward, it'll tend to sharpen up. The jet stream will dip south or dip further south and then come a little bit further to the north. So we're looking for heavier rainfall as a couple of systems develop and move up toward the southern southeast coast. But that won't happen until sometime Sunday afternoon. And then the northern branch up here bringing the colder air into the northwest interior. A couple of troughs, one swinging through tomorrow in this position. You can see another one back here. That whole thing will be dropping southeastward a little bit, and then the trough will be swinging eastward and bringing the snow chances all the way down to the North Gulf Coast Sunday night and Monday. And for 9,000 feet tomorrow, not much wind here over the Bristol Bay area, the Alaska Peninsula, but 25 increasing to 40 knots over the central Aleutians. And 1 week low coming across Kodiak, so not too much in the way of wind. The stronger winds will be off to the east, but only 15 to 25 knots into the panhandle there. See this one trough axis right down into the western interior, maybe up to 25 knots coming across the Yukon Valley, but not all that strong behind. And then 3,000 feet, a little less well-defined, definitely a trough right through here, but very light winds along the axis there, which is pretty broad here, only 10 knots out over the Copper River Basin. Could see some brisker winds come up to the coastline and try to push inland a little bit, but only in the 20 to 25 knot range. South or northerlies 25 across the Pribilofs. Stronger winds though for the eastern Aleutians, looking at 30 to 35 knot winds out to about Atka, but then becoming lighter ahead of with high pressure building into the western Aleutians ahead of a front that's just to the west. Turbulence wise, maybe some mechanical light to moderate type chop here, diminishing throughout the day below 4,000 to 5,000 feet, mostly for smaller aircraft there over the panhandle. Pretty smooth here for everywhere else, Kodiak Island, the North Gulf Coast, all of the eastern interior. And then with those northerly winds continuing there, could be some moderate chop or isolated moderate chop, more likely light here, below 6,000 feet there on the lee, over and to the lee of the mountainous terrain here, St. Lawrence Island, Nunivak Island. A little bit more bumpier there with the stronger winds, eastern Aleutians on out to Atka, ending at Adak, and then that batch is coming in with the next front. And after the break, I'll be back with a look at the marine forecasts.
Hi, I'm Harry Keeling, and on behalf of the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation, Alaska Public Media, welcome to Hangar Flying. Tonight, we're going to show you a video made by Chris Shaver of the NTSB about stall spin awareness. I think you'll find it very educational, and hopefully you will benefit from it.
As an investigator and a GA pilot, nothing pains me more than to see pilots, their friends, and their families lose their lives in accidents that are completely preventable. And low-altitude stalls are just that, completely preventable. From day one in pilot training, we're taught to recognize and recover from stalls, and to never turn back to the field after an engine failure, because that could lead to a stalled condition. But at some point, as pilots, we stop training for those situations. We don't stop flying, but we stop training. Ask yourself, when was the last time that you practiced stall recovery? If your answer is your last flight review, that's just not good enough. At a low altitude, recovery from a stall spin situation is highly unlikely. Therefore, prevention is essential. Indecision, improper planning, and inadequate training all hinder the pilot's ability to effectively respond to an in-flight emergency, such as a stall. In July 2011, a commercial pilot was killed when his airplane's engine lost power shortly after takeoff. Ahead of the airplane lay a long dirt road and a hayfield, yet the pilot sought safety in the runway behind him, and in the attempted turn, lost control. In August 2010, 2 hunters were killed while scouting for moose when the pilot stalled the airplane at low altitude and crashed. Witnesses reported seeing the airplane flying at approximately 100 feet just prior to the accident, and numerous moose hoof prints were found surrounding the accident site. We see a handful of these aptly named moose turn stall accidents every year in Alaska. In March 2010, an airplane was damaged when the pilot attempted a return to the runway after the engine lost power. During the attempted turn, the pilot lost control of the airplane and crashed about 500 feet short of the runway. Directly ahead of the airplane when the engine lost power was an 1,800-foot clearway. There are at least 5 things that you can do to avoid being involved in this type of accident. Number 1, honestly assess your skills. Ask yourself if you're ready to quickly and safely react to a stall in the airplane you're flying. Are you sure? If not, get the training and resources to ensure that you are. 2, know your plane. If you're in a plane that you have little or no experience with, make sure you understand the stall speeds and characteristics of that aircraft. 3, react immediately. At the first indication of a stall, immediately reduce the airplane's angle of attack. An immediate response is crucial to a safe recovery. 4, manage distractions when you're maneuvering at low altitude so you don't get into a stall situation. And 5, don't show off. Unless you're a trained airshow pilot, resist the temptation to show off by performing maneuvers for those on the ground. Such distractions have too often led to humiliating and deadly outcomes. I would not be here to speak with you today if it weren't for continuous training and repetitive preparation on what I would do when and not if a problem occurred, especially on takeoff and landing. This is why professional flight crews train so often and brief every flight with a statement saying, if this happens, this is what we're going to do. Great thing to remember though is that you don't have to be a professional pilot to fly professionally.
Welcome back. Mostly southeast winds, 15 to 20 knots, kind of varying with each, like when the front goes through, turning around to the south, only at about 15, then the next system approaches, turning back to southeast. Pretty light winds, Lincoln Glacier Bay trending south in the afternoon, but only 15. Even lighter winds in store for these areas on Sunday here, but they could come up to 20 knots, especially higher gusts down toward Dixon Entrance. With the advance of the next storm, they're coming northeastward. Look for small craft advisories along the south coast. Really light winds up to the north under high pressure. And then for Prince William Sound, northeast 10 to 20 knots for tomorrow. Small craft advisories at least part of the day here for the North Gulf Coast. And then northerlies could get up to 25 here for the Barren Islands, but lighter winds Kodiak Island, and northerlies 10 to 15 knots. For Cook Inlet, northeast at about 15 for Shelikof Strait. And winds are looking pretty light and variable on Sunday. Again, a broad at trough of low pressure, no gradient, so just variable 5 to 10 knots for Cook Inlet. Same thing for Prince William Sound. Maybe some east winds at about 15 for the eastern Gulf Coast, but light variable conditions right down into the Barren Islands. These winds here for Kamishak Bay and Shelikof Strait trending toward the northwest, but not getting much speed before Sunday night, and that light wind pattern will extend across Kodiak Island and to the east as well. Then for Bristol Bay, light variable winds there, extending south of Kodiak, north 25 at times tomorrow for the Alaska Peninsula, and then those will drop back off down to 15 knots from the north and northwest. Lingering around 20 knots here from Sitkinak to about Chignik. And for the Aleutians, look for gales tonight, shifting eastward here and persisting over the Fox Islands tomorrow from the north and northwest. High pressure, winds dropping off to 10 knots, and then late tomorrow afternoon, possibly coming up as high as 25 knots, but definitely swinging around to the southeast. And then for Sunday, that front pushes eastward. We lose the gales, still some small craft advisories in advance of that as it weakens, and even behind it, north to northwest or west-northwest 25. but much lighter winds now coming into the Fox Islands. And for the southwest coast here, it looks like gale force winds here from Macoriac up to Hooper Bay in this area. Otherwise 25 to 30 knot winds, brisk wind advisories, or in the case of the Pueblo, small craft advisories, with the colder air coming down, freezing spray becoming heavy freezing spray tomorrow night. But less winds means you'll lose those freezing spray warnings. Really becoming light here over the northern Bering Sea, even the Pueblos in the afternoon, and a downward trend along the southwest coast. Up to the north, the Arctic coast, northwest, turning west as high as 20 knots possibly here over toward Kaktovik. Brisk wind advisories, especially early in the day, but again, these winds trending downward throughout the day, and then down to just maybe 15 knots here for Sunday. West-northwest, 5 to 10 for the remainder of the Arctic coastline. And looking at tonight, rain continues to move into the southeast coast here throughout the evening, and it stays wet up along the North Gulf Coast all the way back into Kodiak Island, but probably not as heavy as you've seen the last 24 hours, and probably not as a little more intermittent as well. But clouds up to the north, watching this Arctic boundary come southward, and that low will drop southeastward here from the Aleutian. Stays kind of damp and cloudy up along the North Gulf Coast. Rain through the day Saturday for the Panhandle. Colder air coming in and drier conditions back along this front. But look for a narrow band of light snow right through here. And then that'll continue eastward and southward throughout the night Saturday, and should be something in this position with the coldest air backed up along the Alaska Range, but increasing moisture over south central Alaska will result in a slow increase in the rain and snow chances, but nothing heavy until Sunday night. Rain heavy at times for the southern southeast coast. That's a look at the weather. Have a great weekend, and thanks for joining us.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Alyeska Pipeline Service Company, Alaska's pipeline to the future, delivering oil today, sustaining operations for tomorrow, committed to safety, operating the 800-mile Trans-Alaska Pipeline since 1977.